now yet to another level. We didn't know you played that's the flute? Yeah, yeah.
You might have gleaned that that wasn't actually me, but I mean, I was, pretending
Mimicking
to play
it,
the flute,
yeah,
but that's
yeah.
not actually.
Well, it's very
my music,
convincing.
yeah.
And then, what about the movements of the model? Was that choreographed, or was he just improvising?
Well, again, it was one of those things, I didn't know exactly what that piece would become until I had all the footage back in the studio. But when I was working with Tommy, my idea was to ask him to do certain movements that would walk the line between something choreographed and something where you would like lose control. So we were doing a lot of different things, like sort of different kinds of jumps. And in this case, I asked him to just spin around till he got dizzy and fell down. And the footage was just amazing, because it did look like this kind of really interesting dance, and also in that interest of how the camera elicits a certain kind of self-consciousness. You lose that self-consciousness when you're so dizzy and you're falling down, so there's this kind of shift between his relationship with the audience, I think, as well. And I didn't know that I was, just at the end, I said to Tommy, I was like, can you just, shoot me playing my flute for a few minutes? And I didn't realize that was going to become part of the piece, but it's very central. It ended up being very central to the piece because I'm like this kind of Svengali that, leads him out of the woods, and it's supposed to have, be beautiful and also funny, kind of the music is really over the top. It's actually, the music played in that movie, in the James Bond movie Goldfinger, when the femme fatale enters the scene. So it has this kind of sexy, loungy kind of quality to it that I like a lot.
Okay. And then we have two more video projects, and then there'll be some static work as well before we conclude. Now, these videos are somewhat long, so we thought we'd maybe play a few minutes of each, and then you can tell us a little more about them. So let's start with Me Time. Okay. I was hoping the first transformation would come in it, but maybe a while. So
Goes
you'll.
on a long
Yeah,
time.
it goes on a long time. But then there's a few transformations. So if you could maybe tell everyone a little more about what happens.
it's funny actually because 8 minutes 27 seconds isn't that long, but it feels like a really long time sitting up here with
Yes.
you there.
Yes.
So it cycles through a number of different puppets. Like there's a
Right.
fireman.
Is it
and
the same puppet, just in different clothing, right?
No,
Oh, it's
all
different
from- Yeah,
puppets.
it's like a fireman and a policeman
Okay.
and a construction worker
Right.
and a doctor and a pirate.
It's like the cast of the Village People.
Yeah.
So tell us where this, how did this one come about? What inspired you to do this, and what for you is the meaning of this piece?
Well, it was interesting because most of my video pieces are really labor intensive, and this piece I made like in the year after Brendan was born, and I didn't have the same kind of time resources, so it started to make me think about how I could get at some of the same ideas, the sort of intersection between different realities in a more sort of improvisational, quicker kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
And I was working on a show that was at Unit B Gallery that Kimberly Abushan curated of me, Leslie Fraser, and Guion Shrewsbury, that was called This Is All Real. And it was thinking about sort of, in a really fun, with humor involved, thinking about, what we consider to be real. And so that was where the piece was, where it started from. But then as I videotaped it and started to think about it, I thought there were a lot of interesting issues that came up with gender, and I was thinking about the myth of Pygmalion and this idea that you fall in love with your work, and just, it might sound kind of ridiculous, but this kind of idea of what is love, and...
Well, no, when I was watching, several things came to mind, and I have to say, at first, it's a little bit startling, when you first watch it, and then when you go home after seeing, and I watched the whole thing, so when you go home after seeing it, it starts to come back to you. You start thinking about it more, which is, good art does that, though, great art does that. So, but then the other thing that to me, that stood out was, in your facial expressions. It's like you could give lessons in how to be a loving person, just, the way that you express yourself, with the puppet. But just apply that to a human situation or with a pet,
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the things that, because this piece, I always think about, like, out of everything I've ever made, this piece, I've shown it a lot of times, and I continue to show it. And I think one of the things that makes it work is that there's this really interesting slippage between believing in that dynamic and then realizing that reality is completely false. And I think that quality of the audience kind of going along with you, believing it and then stepping back, is a really interesting experience. And so yeah, that's what I think happens with that piece. After I made it, a friend of mine told me about this phenomenon called uncanny valley, which some of you might know of, which is we have a really hard time, when you see something that's almost human, but you know that it's not, it creates a really kind of interesting, conflicted, uncomfortable feeling. And I think that also comes across in this, because the emotions feel real, but then that it's that it's not, obviously.
It's a puppet.
Yeah, it's a...
Okay. Let's watch a little bit then of the latest video drama. So I'm going to move forward to... Okay, so I wanted to get certainly to that part before we talk about it. So if you would fill us in on just what happens in the last few minutes.
Yeah, they just exchange clothes again, and then Sam leaves, and Julia's left standing there, and then it goes dark.
So it's kind of perfectly symmetrical.
Yeah. That's my dad did the music for this piece also, and that's him in the piece also playing the harmonium, and he's playing. It started out. I asked him if he would play that song "Wild as the Wind" because I thought it had this kind of heightened emotional theatricality that worked in contrast to the sort of the lack of drama that was taking place in a certain way. I thought that would be an interesting kind of relationship. But then he took the music and he changed it and had it sort of morph and create that more sort of dissonant section in the middle, which I think adds tremendously to the piece. And so it was a great collaboration.
And of course, when I watch that, one of the things I think about is issues of gender equality, for example.
Yeah, that's one of we haven't really talked about that, but that's a big that has been a big interest in my work since I've come to San Antonio, I would say, and even before. But in this show this piece was just recently exhibited at the Southwest School of Art in a show called Drama that Kathy Armstrong curated, and I think it's really in the front and center in that show, that interest in gender and the way we read the male nude versus the female nude in nature, and the relationship between nature and gender, and how context defines identity and meaning. I was thinking, just watching this, like this little theater was one of my new favorite finds from the last couple of years, and one of the interesting things that happens is that stage becomes such a powerful frame for whatever you put inside of it. You know,
Yes.
whatever you put inside of that frame becomes performative, which I also think is interesting.
Whoops, back one. Okay, and then we're going to conclude the visuals here with some works from the Southwest School of Art show. And briefly tell us a little bit about this body of work.
I think of these paintings as exploring a lot of the same things as the video. They were all shown together with just a slightly different, angle on the subject matter. But these are some of them are watercolors and some of them are oils, and they're these sort of classical nudes, but with the male nude instead of what maybe is more traditionally comfortable with, which would be like a female nude.
Mm-hmm.
And they also place the figure adjacent or next to the landscape, so they're kind of equally weighted instead of one being inside the other. Is what I was thinking about. So these are also from that show.
Mm-hmm.
And then these last pieces are from a show that opened after the Southwest School at a museum in Milwaukee, the Villa Terrace Museum. But again, exploring those same kind of ideas. They're using historic wallpaper, and they have these kind of different realities placed side by side. So in some of them, there'll be figures that are integrated into the wallpaper, but then you'll see like a still life or a arrangement of flowers like cropped at the bottom of the picture. You can sort of see those, or there'll be like a painted landscape inset into another landscape. So there'll be this kind of play between levels of reality and perception, and so those two bodies of work are the newest
work.
Mm-hmm.
There's another example.
That's a watercolor, from the
Mm-hmm.
Milwaukee show.
And we're going to end with this little montage here, collage of your current studio, I guess, and
Yep.
you working with the video camera, and then your two children.
Yeah, my ongoing and really newest work.
Your newest works of art.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Joey, well, thank you very much for a really great discussion.
Thank you, David.
And we'd like to turn the house lights up and invite questions from the audience, and I believe we're passing the microphone. So is Katie here with the microphone? Maybe we're not passing the microphone. Are we passing the microphone, Katie? I see you there. It's coming. Okay, if you want to raise your hand and the mic's on its way, we'll open it up to questions. Nobody has. Okay, we have a question from Ken Little up in the front row here. So just wait for the mic, it's coming. Well, we're recording, yeah. Well, you know that. Okay.
Great show, Joey.
Thank you.
One of the things that I noticed all through your work is a sort of it's kind of like Alice going through the keyhole, or Alice going down the rabbit hole. You're always going from a microcosm to a macrocosm and back. And you're always going from being very sensual to being very cold, or very I don't mean that in a bad way, just very didactic in a way. Kind of, it goes from being very tactile to being very flat. And you're really good at that. Do you think about those things a lot? For instance, the little theater at the last one, is this little sort of flat theater, and then it's put in this real environment, and then there's the flat trees that are around it,
Yeah.
and then there's all this stuff going on, and then you start to hear people walking around the little theater, and so it seems like you're really juggling a lot of things about intimacy and public and private and micro and
A lot of duality
macro.
going on
I'm
there.
sorry, that's really a long, involved question.
No,
It's
I
mostly-
love hearing your thoughts on it. I think
So I'm just wondering
Yeah.
how you feel about that.
well, I think about that a lot. I think probably a lot of artists and a lot of us do think about sort of that inexplainable coexistence of opposites that so much of the time kind of it defines the human experience. I mean, I was thinking about like, it's funny that you bring that up, because I was actually thinking about, how painting in a certain way, this might sound kind of cheesy, but it's like a Buddhist koan in the sense that it presents two things that that are equally real in a certain way, that you completely, or at least that's my experience, but that's why I love painting so much, is like the figures are, I completely believe in them, and I work with the same models over time, so it's like that is Sam or it is Tommy, but at the same time it's completely not, it's like that this is not a pipe, it's that flatness of the surface, and I kind of revel in that, the sort of the creating that illusion, and then the kind of insistence that it is an illusion at the same time, which is one of the things that I love with a lot of the painters that I love do, and I think that those kind of that formal interest in breaking the picture plane and insisting on it at the same time extends conceptually as well, and in its most sort of elemental experience, that's a kind of transcendence, right? Transcending from one state of consciousness, one reality to another. David Lynch is like one of the big proponents of transcendental meditation right now, and and I love his movies, but a big conversation in the TM world is like, how can he be the spokesman for TM? His movies are so dark, because they're amazing but scary. But I think one of the things that manifests in those movies is that he's always kind of like breaking that reality. You're sort of breaking through to another, sort of transcending one space to another. And a lot of the work that I really like seems to do that, so I try to do that also. I'm so glad you picked up on that sound of the footsteps, because that was an accident, but I think it's also one of the most important pieces of that piece in terms of defining a less like straightforward sense of space. Yeah, because all of a sudden there's like this.
A change in scale, you said, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like, I don't know, they just played this piece at Art Pace a little while ago, but that Janet Cardiff piece where you're watching this tiny like movie theater, and then it's a sound piece, and all of a sudden you hear people like crunching popcorn and whispering next to you, and it's completely disarming, because all of a sudden you feel like, oh, I'm wrapped in this piece. I'm not a spectator here, and the piece is there. And in drama, I wanted to also have the viewers, create this kind of layers of voyeurism, like watching, and then the viewer becomes kind of part of that continuum.
Do we have another question for Joey? Yes, in the back there.
I really, really enjoy your work, and
Thank you.
and I'm glad to come and see it. And one thing I was thinking about when we were watching it is I've seen some of your work maybe online. I haven't had the chance to see it necessarily at an exhibition space, at least not your video work. And I wonder what you think about when you think about how an audience perceives your films. I think is something that we're always thinking about, is whether it's online or whether it's in an exhibition space or whether it's in front of a live audience. How that changes an audience's perception of it. Some of your work is very intimate, and something that I can see experiencing in an exhibition space and really enjoying. But at the same time, hearing people's reactions and all those things. I wonder, how does that change your perception of the pieces depending on the audience that's